Spike, thank you for joining us today here at C2E2.
Chris, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I know you're here in Chicago all the time, like you live here.
Yes.
Like you work here.
Yes.
But I appreciate you coming into this very vast, cold, windy, sometimes with birds, building to be with us today.
I've emerged from the sewers to trouble the locals, yeah. It happens once, twice, thrice a year. Usually, they'll kill a rooster or something and I'll disappear until next fall, but I'm here special just for y'all.
Yeah. My questions are pretty much just questions that I have that we're going to let other people get to see into our conversation.
Okay.
Feel free to shut me down anytime you want.
Okay.
Feel free to egg me on. But what are you literally working on right now? Like when you go home tonight, what is on your drawing table? What is on your very professional hardwood business desk right now?
When I go home and the bra comes off and the pants come off and everything, the stuff that I can talk about,
Okay.
what I'm working on now is the next crowdfund for Iron Circus Comics.
Uh-huh.
Hi, I founded and run Iron Circus Comics, the biggest alternative publisher in Chicago, possibly the entire American Midwest. We specialize in the strange and amazing. The crowdfund that we are launching in April is called Runaway to the Stars. It's a hard sci-fi story about a trans-species adoptee, an alien, a hexapodal, I think that's the word, alien, adopted by Jovians. They're around the moon of Jupiter, and raised kind of in isolation, just among humans. And they run into a rogue AI at their kind of not so great job where they scrap spaceships for a living.
Yeah.
And shenanigans ensue. And that has been a webcomic that's been running for a while now by the exquisitely talented cartoonist Jay Eaton. And that is crowdfunding in April, and everybody should get on it. It is an amazing book. It's the kind of book I am incredibly proud to be able to publish. It was the kind of book Iron Circus was like conceived to bring into this world.
Yeah. I want to kind of ask, aren't all AIs eventually rogue? Should we just assume that they are to begin
Yeah, at
with?
this point, yeah. Once they get to the point where they actually have minds and we're not just being told by Sam Altman that they have minds when it's actually true, we'll be able to worry about that.
Yeah. But is there any, going back to my envisioned desk, mahogany maybe, is there any room
Chipboard, thank you.
Is there any room for Spike the artist to maybe peek through, Spike the writer, Spike the doodler?
Let me tell you a conversation I had with myself when I was like 25, 26. My interests are esoteric and narrow, and that reflects in my work. For example, right now, the comic I am working on, the webcomic I'm working on, which is on hiatus, as all webcomics functionally are at one point, it's on hiatus till I get 50 pages in the backlog, but it is commentary on revolution, like the idea of a people's revolution against autocratic power. It stars marsupial Cossacks, that's the best way to describe them. It's strongly inspired by what went on in sort of pre-Soviet Russia, Tsarist Russia, I guess you could say, like the story of Tsarist Russia, I find endlessly fascinating. Like the multi-generational fumble of Tsarist Russia blows my mind, and how specifically revolution fails the revolutionaries inevitably. It seems almost a part of the human condition that everyone is massively betrayed and disappointed by violent revolution, and that fascinates me too, and I'm putting that in a webcomic. But when I was younger, when I was making other comics, weirder comics, I had a conversation with myself, and the conversation went, okay, you clearly like weird shit, right? The audience for the kind of thing you want to make is never going to be the kind of audience where you're going to end up like on a billboard in Times Square, where you're going to end up on a red carpet in Hollywood. That's not in the cards for you because of what you like to make. Now, there are two approaches you can take. You can either change what you do on a fundamental level to be more in line with what you think the world wants, and live that lie, and maybe it'll work out, but hey, maybe it won't. Or you can keep doing your weird bullshit in the corner, like a child finger painting on a wall, and just doing that for the 10,000 people on Earth who will appreciate it, and figure out another way to still sort of scrape a living in comics.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where Iron Circus came from, because in the small press, I developed a skill set that a lot of other people kind of didn't want to bother with. Like a lot of people don't want to learn pre-press. A lot of people don't want to learn how to quote for print runs. A lot of people don't want to learn how to run and fulfill a crowdfund. I already know that shit. Yeah. So if someone is willing to, like, you know, go through me to do all of that, I offer that service. And that allows me to scrape something resembling a living in comics while still finger painting in the corner. You know, still making my weird comics for 10,000 people.
So in some ways, is your publisher job the most enjoyable day job that you can have, so you can finance your comics creating career of your own?
Enjoyable is strong. I enjoy the job, that's true. But, you know, if I had a genie and I could make a wish, I'd wish about 50 million more people were into stories about marsupial Cossacks.
Yeah.
But guess what? We don't live in that world.
Yeah.
And I think Iron Circus is contributing a lot to sort of like the publishing landscape. It's like the books that have found a home at Iron Circus. I'm immensely proud.
If not for Iron Circus, then who?
Yeah, exactly. Like, we published Poorcraft, a series of books about living well on less, and that was like, Poorcraft #1 was our very first Kickstarted book back the year Kickstarter launched. That has gone on tens of thousands of copies sold direct through us, and that has been a big deal for us. And then, you know, we put out Banned Book Club about being a reader, a college student it's a memoir, being a college student who reads banned books in authoritarian South Korea. And that has resonated with a lot of people, especially in this day and age with book bans advancing all over the United States. That one has been incredibly satisfying to see the reaction to, especially seeing actual kids start banned book clubs and it being like reported on in NPR. And it's like, I did that. That was me, you know? And I get to take, however small, some level of credit for sort of like being that person, the person who makes sure stuff like that gets to exist. And stuff like Runaway to the Stars, the story will be kickstarting in April. Like, I love that is going to be an Iron Circus book. Like, call it Reflected Glory, call it whatever. I'm just so pleased that I get to be that person for that story. Same way I'm that person for a lot of really meaningful and impactful stuff.
I was reading through the webcomic and kind of imagining how the layout would be for that. But the webcomic, it reminded me of like the hard sci-fi that I would read in like 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And then I go back to that it's not doesn't have the Star Trekification of these monocultures where every planet is just, everybody's the same.
Yeah, exactly. I freaking, like, honestly, Runaway to the Stars is one of my favorite webcomics right now. Yeah. Like, I'm reading it in real time as it updates, and it's fantastic. The world building is on point. Yeah. The alien design is on point. The sort of social aspects of, you know, how an interspecies society, a galactic society would work is on point. The creators even thought about how the spaceship's microgravity would function in flight versus stationary orbit. It's fantastic.
I like the world building, but it's not, in my mind, it's not the world building of it needs to be a franchise world building.
Yes.
But it's almost like world building in a, like, I have all these ideas and I want to explore it, and it's going to end up in a handbook, in a wiki page, which they have, like, I like the wikis for it, to really just make these.
Just a lot of joy of creation, not toyification, you know?
Joy of creation, not toyification.
Yeah.
That is a quote. And
that one was off the dome.
Yeah. When you, like, you're very experienced in webcomics, and now you're experienced in converting webcomics to print.
Yep.
Like, how do you evaluate, because there's a lot of great webcomics out there. You can't publish them all.
Nope.
Unless there's somebody with money that wants to give it right here. But how do you decide, like, what are the things that you look for, like, after you say, hey, this webcomic is great, what do you look for to say, like, this is a thing where I know what to do to get this to those people you were talking about that can do it? Like, how do you determine that?
It's hard to put into words. The thing I'm most fond of saying is there's one hurdle at Iron Circus, and it's me.
Okay.
And if I like it, that's kind of like the biggest hurdle you need to get over. And that's once you're over that, I'm good. And honestly, It's vibes. It's fully vibes. I read a ton of webcomics. I read the first 10 pages of lots of webcomics and then never go back. But if I'm sitting there and I'm like waiting on updates and I'm hitting refresh, that's kind of the person I'm going to be emailing and going like, hey, have you thought about publishing this? Which is how you have to approach it these days, because having a publisher is not necessary. You do not have to have a publisher to find an audience willing to support you to make your comic these days.
Yeah.
Patreon exists, Kickstarter exists. I know tons of people that don't have official publishers. They're not even self-published. They never commit it to paper, and they pay their rent and buy their groceries and keep the lights on,
Yeah, you don't need to get permission from a publisher or a distributor or that kind of stuff. You can if you still want to ask permission.
Yeah, and the thing I'm always telling people is, if part of your dream is walking into Barnes and Noble, and seeing your book on the shelf, next to like Fruits Basket and One Piece and Amulet and Bone, okay, yeah, you're going to need a publisher for that. But if you just want to sit in your comics cave and update your webcomic 3 times a week, and if you manage to be in that like top 2% of comics Patreons where you are pulling enough to support yourself, that's plenty. You don't need more than that. You do not need 10 million people reading your comic on Webtoon to make a living. I mean, nice work if you can get it, but it's not something necessary for you to stay in, Beans and Netflix.
Yeah. You were one of the main innovators to kind of turn Kickstarter into this, Kickstarter and crowdfunding in general, to innovate in the way comics can work through there and use Kickstarter and the pluses and minuses that come with Kickstarter to do that. It seems easy now that you and others have built it.
Yeah.
But now, how do you look at the Kickstarter and crowdfunding market? Do you think it's matured, or is it still growing and being weird in the right ways, or is it kind of reached a level?
I think Kickstarter is unique in its relationship to comics, because I think it's one of the very few creative fields out there where if Kickstarter, for whatever reason, decided tomorrow they weren't going to support comics anymore, the industry would suffer horribly, just because of the nature of what comics has gone through in North America. If the name Frederick Wordham rings a bell for anybody watching this, you'll know what I'm talking about. Comics being self-published and creator-owned, and that actually being what's considered sort of a respectable, legitimate avenue of creation. Because, there's, or at least there used to be, some stigma attached to prose novelists going out and publishing their own stuff. Like that was called vanity publishing. Comics never had that issue. For decades and decades, if you had a story that didn't fit a very specific mold, you kind of had no choice but to either go alternative slash indie. And nowadays, Kickstarter is kind of the first and only stop for a lot of people. And I think Kickstarter is ever evolving. It's hard to say if it's mature or not, because I don't believe that state exists. I think it will be constantly changing, because society is constantly changing, and the kind of people who are making and reading comics is constantly morphing one way or another. Like when I joined Kickstarter, I joined the year, like I said, it launched, and that was back when you needed an invite to join Kickstarter. It didn't even have a comics category. And now they're very aware of how important they are to comics. And obviously there's a comics category, and there's some major heavy hitters in that category all the time. Like companies that people would lecture me. It's like, you'd never see this mainstream publisher using Kickstarter because that's not classy. That's like, really? Really? And nowadays, they're clearing like 6 figures on there 2 or 3 times a year. Even, what you consider a mainstream publisher uses Kickstarter.
Like even Marvel, even if they're not doing Marvels and DCs, even if they're not doing directly, licensed Marvels and DC stuff are being allowed by Marvel and DC to be on those platforms.
Yeah, obviously, absolutely. Because again, the weird ecosystem that comics has had to deal with in North America, where we're in our own little special shops over off to the side. We're not originally, for a long time, we weren't in bookstores. We are now, but comics were kind of sequestered to their own little area. And there were decades and decades in America that you and I'm sure both remember, where if you didn't go into a comic shop, you didn't see comics being sold anywhere except maybe 3 or 4 in the grocery store. That is a very bizarre ecosystem, and it's not conducive to finding new readers because it's very clubby, it's very closed off. And because of that, comics have had a lot of trouble gaining, like even now with Scholastic, one of the biggest publishers in America, Scholastic, the only publisher, God, I'm jealous. They can walk into a school and set up their table, their con table, and be like, buy it. And the students will be corralled and herded towards the, God, I wish that was me.
Iron Circus Book Fair. Iron Circus
Book Fair. Yeah, make it happen, world.
Iron Circus.
But they kind of had a big hand in kind of resurrecting comics for middle graders and around that age, and that's been amazing. And you know, Tokyo Pop as well has had a massive part in sort of rekindling the comics market. Comics are in an amazing place right now, but they are still like 1/10 the size of prose, and that's mind-boggling to think about, that we've had this double-digit meteoric screaming to the stratosphere growth over the last several years, and we're still 1/10 the size of prose.
There's still so much potential, much potential.
And even now it's kind of stratifying, like because it's Scholastic, you know, the books that are getting the most attention are the ones for the middle graders, the younger kids. And because Scholastic has that advantage of being able to walk into school, they can make sales no one else can make. And, you know, nice work if you can get it. But to my mind, there's still kind of a paucity of comics for people who are kind of adults, but not necessarily looking for manga storylines. And there are so many people out there making those comics, but for whatever reason, like the audience and those books aren't quite there yet, you know. And I always say one of the things I'm really looking forward to is sort of the bone of the adult comic world, like the book that takes off and 10 million people are buying it and reading it, even though it's a graphic novel and they can't keep it in stock, and that sort of convinces large publishing houses and Barnes and Noble and whoever to maybe make a little more space on the shelves for those kinds of books. Because, you know, Bleach has its place on the shelf, you know, a Batman omnibus has its place on the shelf, and Dogman has its place on the shelf, and those guys are doing great. But like the kind of books that I would like to see find more readership is that it still feels niche. It still feels underrepresented, you know?
We could talk about comics all day, and we probably will after this interview. But I want to talk to you about cartoons. Before we go.
Please.
Like, me and you love cartoons. There's so many cartoons now that we probably have favorite cartoons that the other doesn't even know, and back and forth. And like the mainstream cartoon market has indie successes like Hazbin Hotel that becomes an Amazon Prime thing, which is a whole other thing. There's so much now. But you with Iron Circus are cooking up these amazing animations there that one way or another will probably be the next big thing. So you have lots of feelings on this. I'm not even going to ask a question.
There's a lot of stuff I can't talk about right now, but I can definitely talk about Lackadaisy.
Okay.
Lackadaisy is one of those things. It was a life-changing experience for me. If you haven't seen Lackadaisy, go watch Lackadaisy. When I was in California one year for a convention, I was approached by Fable Siegel, who works in animation. They're a showrunner, and they're like, "Oh, are you Spike Trotman? Because I'm friends with Tracy Butler, and Tracy Butler has been trying to make a Lackadaisy cartoon with me for the past couple of years, and you run Kickstarters, right? Would you run a Kickstarter for something like that?" And again, it was like the planets aligned. It was like the star appeared in the 7th house of my, whatever people say, and it was bizarre because I absolutely had always wanted to be part of that, but I had no in. I had no idea how to even approach it. And the next thing you know, me and Tracy and Fable are talking about how we're going to fund a pilot, then how we're going to fund a season. And I think indie animation is in a wildly exciting place right now. And we could get real brutal and talk about why that is. But I'm going to stay positive and say, because indie animation is now perceived as a possibility, as a thing that can happen, as opposed to some like bizarre pipe dream that was completely impossible because animation is so outrageously expensive. we're going to see so much more interesting work that somebody in a suit passed on because they didn't think they could turn it into a toy, basically. And it's going to be all over YouTube. And all I can hope for is that the fan base kind of rises to the call. I guess that's the best way to put it. Because cool stuff these days does not get to exist without, in my opinion, without direct fan support.
Yeah.
Because we were just talking about things wanting, like that large corporations sort of franchising ideas, and they're kind of just like trying to set and forget on ideas and concepts and stories. And you know what? This isn't a bag on you. If you love Star Wars and Star Trek and all that stuff, that's great. But because those corporations have Star Wars and Star Trek and so forth, they're kind of not really interested in anything else, because we live in a modern age where if a creator comes to them with an idea, they're going to want residuals. They're going to want partial ownership. You know, the days of, you know, just turning over your idea to a network people are very reluctant to do that now. And that's why you see stuff constantly being recycled, ideas they already own, because that means they don't have to give anybody any kickbacks. Yeah. And so even if someone who is like on the internet and has, you know, 50 million views on YouTube comes to them with an idea and it's sort of like a guaranteed banger, you know, certified hood classic or whatever, they're going to probably pass. The same way they pass on like Craig McCracken constantly pitching ideas, because he's Craig McCracken. He's going to want percentage, and they don't want to give anybody percentage anymore. Yeah. And I look forward to the day when people kind of that tier, you know, no shade on everybody who's doing it now, because there are some very, very important people in animation who have moved into the indie sphere now. But it's going to be wild when we see like really established dudes who have these pedigrees showing up on Kickstarter with the ideas that like big networks refuse to fund and big streaming platforms refuse to fund, because they have to watch the numbers and be all like, no, we're not going to let you do this. But can you do Powerpuff Girls again? Can you do this other thing we own again? Can you do Scooby-Doo? Can you do all this other stuff that's kind of in the vault? You know, and like, no, I don't want to do stuff that's in the vault. I want to do new things. Yeah. But anyway, rise to the challenge. If you see a crowdfund for an animated show, fund it. Give those people your money, because that's the most interesting stuff out there right now. And other creators you love, are watching those crowdfunds fund going, maybe I could do that. And wouldn't you love to see what your favorite animation writer and animation designer and animation showrunner could do completely off the chain? Wouldn't that be fun? So, like, please support indie animation the same way y'all support indie comics, because it's already happening. It's happening right now, you know, and it needs your help to survive.
Yeah. That is a great place to end it. Thank you very much, Spike.
Thanks for having me.
This was great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.